My name is Bright Nana Amfo. Now, tonight, I have in the studio a young Ghanaian who is rallying the youth of this country to wake up and take the destiny of this country into their hands. He's had very serious international experience consulting for the World Bank, the UNDP, the DFID, and many other international institutions. Now he's a PhD student at the Cambridge University at the Faculty of Law, and he is the convener of Fix the Country movement. My guest is Mausi Oliver Barker-Vormawor. Welcome.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
You love Ghana. Is it an understatement?
Perhaps it's an overstatement. No, I mean, I've always talked about the tragedy of a number of us who were born to Ghana, raised in Ghana, and have such deep connections with the country that even in so many times when I've tried to disconnect, I've not been successful. And there's been times in my past where I was like, I'm done with Ghana, I'm not going to do anything with Ghana. And I was abroad, working forever. And anybody who I would have a conversation with, I would try to facilitate them to leave Ghana, right? But it's a pool that it's supposed, if you want to have it in biblical terms, like what Jonah was doing, right? Like you're trying to fight against something, and that's how I've always felt, that I was trying to run away from something rather than run towards something which is perhaps destined.
I see. So it is not a matter of you loving Ghana more than those who are ruling Ghana.
Well, I think that we are all raised with a certain sense of appreciation for the country we have. I think that our educational system inculcates us to have a certain belief about where Ghana is, what its potential is. But something happens along the way, right? For persons who seek elective office. And I genuinely want to believe that they are coming from a perspective where they want to do something about the country they hopefully loved at a point. But we're not seeing that anymore, and hopefully I say that we're not seeing that anymore because I cannot for the life of me believe that any person who truly loves Ghana will treat it the way in which we've treated it. And loving Ghana entails not only, what it has to offer resource-wise, but also the people within it, and the kind of humanity with which we treat the people with it. And yeah, I don't see a lot of humanity in our policies.
Oliver, are you a rebel? Do you fight authority?
No, I'm unfortunately not. Maybe I'd love to be, but I'm not. Even though traditionally I kind of feel that my whole life has always been about the way in which you improve a polity is holding power to account.
Right.
And the process of holding power to account, we have to remember that it is not those who demand that power be limited who are rebelling, but those who abuse power who are real rebels in that regard. So I do think that, no, those of us who are calling for more restrictions on power are, in fact, those who have I suppose, a democratizing ideal of how power needs to be used. And those who abuse it are, in fact, rebelling against the societal values and constitutional values we have for ourselves.
You had a brush with the law. The state which you belong to is, let me put it this way, is fighting you.
Yeah.
You've done wrong.
Yeah.
Is that why the state is fighting you?
Well, I think I would have a bigger problem if the entirety of Ghanaians were fighting me. I think that there has been a breakdown, or there's a gap between what the state is and those who control the state and what they use it for, and what the majority of Ghanaians want and what Ghanaians are looking for. An example can be this whole conversations around constitutional reforms. There's a vast majority of Ghanaians who are interested in it, but the state itself is not incentivized for it. There's a vast majority of Ghanaians who feel like we need to do more regarding corruption, but the state has not found the incentive to fight it. So there's a dichotomy between the people and the state. And the state is controlled by a few individuals, less than 10,000 individuals, right? If you take all government appointees and parliament and all of that. And I genuinely believe that those people hold control of the state. In fact, when it comes down to it, I can believe that even persons who are using the state to prosecute me and to criminally pursue me would not be more than 10. Like there's certain people who are using the state in a way in which doesn't represent what the national thinking on it is. And we have to be reminded of that there are individuals who are using the state as a mask to pursue
interests that citizens like you.
Right, to shut down critical voices, to ensure that very early time people think about how do we reform politics the better to serve Ghanaians, that those people must be made to feel like outcasts. We must make those people feel afraid for their lives in a way that translates to other people and say that, hey, you see how you're treating this person. If you dare speak up, this is what is going to happen to you.
You raised the issue of constitutional reform, and you said that the state is not ready to go into changing what you think is wrong.
Yes.
What should we do to force the state to change it?
First let me talk about the history, and then we can think about how we think about solutions.
Fix it, right.
When we were putting together the 1992 Constitution as it exists, every political actor understood that this was not the right document for the long road ahead in terms of building a real democratic culture. There was an interest in that point that the PNDC needed to evolve into a political project, and so they dropped the P. And when they were thinking of creating a sort of dynasty, they reflected on, okay, we haven't had a constitution for more than 20 years. How can we create a document that ensures that we transition into something that continues our power base? And that's what they created. They created a document that essentially was to do that. It wasn't about, how do we ensure the better for the entirety of the citizens? And people within the entire space understood this and knew this. In fact, there are people who are in the opposition then, who promised to fight it at all costs. But then there was a consensus decision made that, okay, it's what we have now. We want to keep rolling out at some point, and this allows it to have a shot at electoral politics. Maybe we can do that. But we promise you Ghanaians that once we get power at the first opportunity, we're going to change that constitution.
Right.
That's what they said. That was what the Grand Alliance and all of the Great Alliance and all of that. It never happened, right? When it got power, they then became the biggest defenders of the constitutional document, because it's the document that serves power. And those are power
not the people.
No. It is not structured in a way that thinks really critical about what are the main societal problems we are looking to solve. And I think that, even Kutu Achampon said something, that one man, one vote has no meaning unless it's accompanied by one man, one bread. We are not solving the real economic anxieties of people. People are put on this earth not to suffer till death, right? And it's not about, and I don't think that the document really thinks about that specifically. Now, about what we should do. There was leading up to the 2008 elections, every political actor had promised that they were going to reform the constitution. And when President Mill came, he put together, a multi-partisan commission for which I worked, which was, let's look at the constitutional document again and make amendments. The proposals that were made for constitutional reform, direct constitutional changes, ran almost 300, directly touching the constitution. And I have talked about, if you're trying to come to it with an idea of let's amend certain things, you're going to do patchwork. But let's take the entire document and say, if we were to do this again, if we were to solve economic inequality, if we were to really ensure that our democracy is participatory, how would we go about it? Not about taking one provision and correcting. We should have used gender-neutral language, and we said he for president instead of, a person. And so let's change that. That is not really answering questions. And I think that even when we have these conversations, persons within the status quo are proposing all these technical amendments. Or let's separate Minister of Justice from Attorney General.
Right.
It doesn't make any difference because they're all sitting in cabinet. And so this kind of superficial conversations around how do we really move the conversation forward and how we ensure that Ghanaians feel that this democracy can answer our basic economic needs isn't being taken. And I fear that as long as democracy for a vast majority of people loses the ability to respond to critical questions, people are going to lose faith in it. They're not going to trust this vehicle. Because we've told people that bring your faith into this thing, and this is what is going to lead us forward. And so what we are doing, and we have been accused of trying to provoke a coup d'etat, all kinds of things.
We'll talk about that.
One of the things we're doing is that we're trying to save our democracy. We're saying that if we don't
calling for
do
a change of a review of the constitution.
Yes, we're calling for democratic reforms within the constitutional framework. Because if you do not allow that process to happen, for people to renew their faith in this project, people are going to lose it.
If I were you, I mean, I am trying to help my state you're talking about reviewing the constitution, and then because of that you're coming up against the law. I would have withdrawn and settled. Why wouldn't you do that?
I have a strange feeling that those who do not wish well for this country would want that. And that's when I was in detention.
They want to see you withdraw.
Yes. When I was in detention, and I decided that I wasn't going to apply for bail, for instance, immediately I was going to fight for those people who the police continually sent to wrong courts and which were choking our criminal justice system. And so I challenged that all the way to the highest court of the land. I was having police people come and say, why won't you just apply for bail and leave? And I said, no, the project is bigger than that. And I'm an activist. Whatever situation I find myself, I have to ask myself, how do I make my corner brighter? How do I make impact in a way that is felt by people? And that's the choices I'm making every day. So as I was in detention, I asked myself, what would these people want? They want me to shut up. They want us not to produce persons of courage, persons like myself, and they'll be winning, right? And so that mental hold over me, I kind of decided to lose it and do what I can do now in the hope that it provides an avenue and a path for improving our democracy.
You employed at the Kotoka International Airport.
Yeah.
You didn't have any idea of what was going to happen to you?
I absolutely knew.
Or you knew, but
yes, I knew what
like
was
you
going
said,
to happen.
was
In
a
fact,
bigger project you wanted to come in.
Yes.
You
in
knew
fact, before I came down, and I flew, even before before I flew and left and came, I had already been called and told by elements close to the government, and I knew the thinking that was going on. Because I had been invited at the time by the Danish embassy and the European missions to speak to them, and that was why I came. I booked, it was supposed to be a 1 week in and out. And I found out this was what they were deliberating. And the conversation was whether they should arrest me before or after my event. And so I knew this. In fact, I transited through Portugal. And while I was at the airport for a while, I was on conference with my lawyers, kind of deciding what we should do and what we should go to. But it was important for me to be able to come there because I don't want to be forced into exile. I don't think that our democracy will improve if people who want to, reform the status quo are made to flee from the country. So I wanted to go through the process. And hopefully that allows us to have grounded conversations about what it will take. I knew that I would be exposed to the kind of things I was exposed to, including being tortured.
And yet you were ready.
And yes, I decided that, I just prayed over it.
So what kind of faith is that? I mean, Jesus knew he was going to be crucified. He knew those who would do it, and yet he went there. You knew all this, and yet you came in? What kind of faith is that?
I hadn't even thought about an analogy with Jesus. But what I did was I prayed. I prayed that wherever this leads, I hope that it improves the lot for other people. And one of the things I said is that I think that the biggest thing that can be taken away from me is perhaps my life. And so I had to accept that I've seen people who have died needless deaths in this country, whose lives amounted to nothing. And my only prayer was that if that was to happen to me, at least it provided opportunity for conversation and it sparked a real process towards democratic reforms. And so I prayed and then came. And said,
how were those days in the custody of the police service?
When I came in, the real thing happened when I was arrested at the airport, where I was beaten up, spat on, tortured, blindfolded, taken out of the city.
The Attorney General said all this didn't happen in that day.
The Attorney General was called and talked about how I was tortured, and he said I was looking for an air condition in the prison cells. There was no investigations into any of the things I have talked about. There was no process to have a genuine attempt to review these facts. And then says it on radio, the Deputy Attorney General. I've decided not to engage because I'm actually going to sue. And then we see what happens. And I'm going to tell, and I'm in the process of telling that story because I want us to hold a mirror to the kind of institutions that claim to love this democracy, but at every opportunity you abuse it, for everybody to see that. Now, when I was in detention in the police cells, I think the police had already made their intention clear that they were not going to, respect the 48-hour rule, which is a constitutional provision. And it's weird to me that, those persons who claim that I want to overthrow the constitutional framework make the least attempt at preserving it.
To obey that same constitution.
To obey that. And I think it's important that we have that conversation. In fact, I wrote a piece, press statement around when Nkrumah was overthrown on the 24th of February, where I saw that there was a lot of commentary in the Daily Graphic, which was valorizing the 1966 coup d'etat and all of those things. And I talked about, for people who claim to be historically so opposed to coup d'etats, we should have a fondness for certain coup d'etats. And it's so strange to me that I was being arrested at the Kotoka International Airport, an airport that honors a person who committed a coup d'etat. This is not a democracy that, is committed to retiring violence in how we, this thing. And all those, ironies hit me, and I write about them. But yeah, my time in detention, listen, I spent the time and I told myself, this is about preparing myself mentally. And so I did nothing but read and write. I read about 13 books within the 35 days I was
How
arrested.
did you get those books?
With the friends.
Brought them in?
Brought the books, and I was able to convince the police to give me a rechargeable lamp, because there's no lights in the cells, and so I was reading with that lamp. And I did the rest in writing. I've written a manuscript of 300 pages while lying on my stomach in the cells. And my hope is that I'll be able to tell that story. I'll be able to, go talk about some of the things that are going through my mind in that minute, if only to remind myself later on of the things, of what this journey has meant to me, and what are the things we're sacrificing to be able to get there as a people.
The people in there knew you as Oliver? You saw
in fact,
who
no.
knew you?
When I went in there, no.
They
Actually,
didn't know
one
you
person
at all.
had been brought in subsequently who knew me. A lot of them had been in there for 3 years.
And so they had
They
not
had
heard
no
about
idea
you.
what was going on. So then I sat them through the night, and one of the things I said to myself was that if I cannot convince these 35 people in here of what we are doing and the right course in which we are pursuing, then I need to abandon the project. And so by the time I was arrested in there, and by the Monday morning I was being taken out of the cell, the emails were on their feet chanting "Arise Ghana Youth for your country." They were chanting "Free Oliver for a better Ghana," and they were preventing the police from taking me out from the cells. That tells you of the kind of work we are doing. And there's nothing easier to sell than a good product. And I think that was what the conversations we had in there with people have been. And these are friends I have made. I was in Ankafu to visit some of them, and I was actually in court yesterday representing one of them.
You went in there. How that's a cell, not a prison.
So that's the police,
A police
cell.
cell. How do they look like? You are a legal person. In terms of the conditions there, is this something you can be proud of?
I have described the conditions of our cells as evidence of man's inhumanity to man. Because if we can let people live in those conditions, there's something fundamentally wrong with the psyche of this country. That if things like that do not anger us to, I don't know what kind of society we've built and what kind of values we have as a society. In fact, none of what I have said coming out of the cell is not something that we didn't know about. There's so many, the UN rapporteur on torture and cruel detentions have profiled Ghana's prisons for so long. There are reports dating back to 2014, which are consistently talking about the inhumanity in our cells. And so many people have gone in there and come out and told their stories. But the fact that we do not think it as a moral duty, the fact that we don't see the moral agency of treating these people right, persons who are innocent, because in the police detention cells, these are persons who have not been convicted.
To be innocent, right.
So these are persons who, in fact, the only reason we are keeping them is because we are worried that they may not be able to stand for trial. We are not punishing them. And the inhumanity of the conditions they are dealt with, persons who are starved and are not fed. And in fact, when I tried to organize donations to the Shaman police cells, and the police refused the donation, saying that I was attention seeking. Now somebody in the Ashaman's police cells has died from starvation. And that's an issue that we are going to be pursuing. We've written to the police and we asked for an RTI request. And we said, okay, if you claim that we are lying and the persons in there are being fed, show us the budget line that is giving you money and feeding them, and tell us, how the money is being spent. For about 3 weeks, they haven't responded to the RTI request. And we've gone to the RTI commission. And the bigger problem for me is this. The police know it. I speak to them informally. I am a barracks boy myself. This is one of the things people don't know. I grew up in the police barracks. My mom is a police inspector. And there's nothing, I was raised by police officers, and I have enormous respect for people who I feel deeply about. And I know that there are so many people within the police service who genuinely want the right things to be done. These are persons who are using their money to feed inmates at the time. They want the institution to be improved. They want the best for the institution. And to think that the police hierarchy released a statement claiming that I was lying, when they know that this is in fact true, because they are sensitive of not making the government look bad, that is the height of where we have gone to as a society. And I think that's a problem.
At this point, the members of Fix the Country, when was the first time you got contact when you were put in the cells?
I think my first contact with any person within the country was when I was being taken to court.
They were around you?
When I went to court, they were out. A lot of them have mobilized, and were protesting.
Okay, so
there.
From the airport to the cells, you never had contact
none
with
of that
them?
period. I had no contact
You
with them.
didn't ask
in
for
fact,
your
I talked
lawyer
about,
for you to see your lawyer? You
in
didn't
fact,
ask?
In fact, when I talked about how I was on conference with my lawyers in Portugal, when I arrived at the airport, there were 2 lawyers at the airport, and one was at the airport police station waiting for me. For over 5 hours, they had no contact with me. I kept insisting for my lawyers, and it's almost as if that was a trigger word. Because anytime I asked for lawyers, I got a slap for it. Because you think that your law, your constitution things will save you here. And so for them, by 11 p.m., they had no idea where I was in the process. And that provoked a statement that was released by then saying that I had disappeared, because they had no clue what had happened. The flight had arrived, people had come out. It was only 4 a.m. the next morning that the police issued a statement saying that I had been arrested and that I was being held at the Tema Regional Police Station, which was untrue. So my lawyer spent the entire day then going to Tema, back and forth, and trying to find which police station I was being held at. Face the country, supporters were going around the police stations trying to find where I was being held. And so there was a deliberate attempt to grant me access to counsel. In fact, I was able to see my lawyers at around 5 p.m. the next day. And when they came, they noticed that the police had issued a statement saying that they were going to arraign me on Monday, which was clear indication that they had no interest in respecting the 48-hour rule. So they made a demand to them that if you're not, you've been charged, I hadn't been charged, they said they were investigating me for a misdemeanor offense.
That's what they told you?
Yes. I was cautioned for a misdemeanor offense of conduct conducive to the breach of peace. I hadn't been charged. I said, okay, well, there's nobody more notorious in this country, I suppose, now than me. You can give this person self-recognizance bail. This person knew and had written publicly that he knew he was going to be arrested and still came. So there was no intention of me going anywhere. And after all, it's a misdemeanor. This is my first time I've ever been in conflict with the law. So there was no reason why I would be kept in the cells. But you're claiming that you're not going to respect the 48-hour rule, so we're making a formal demand for him to be released. They said no. When I was taken to court on the 14th of February, I hadn't been charged with any offense. I was only cautioned in respect of the misdemeanor offense. And yet when we go to court, the judge had been given a charge sheet for treason felony, which I hadn't been cautioned about. The charges hadn't been put to me for me to respond to, nothing. Only to tell, so that the judge will say I have no jurisdiction over this, and to send him back. I have talked about in the past of how one of the things Nkrumah is criticized for is the Preventive Detention Act.
Right.
Holding persons without, being charged for how many days? I was in police custody for 35 days. And none of that period was I ever charged with any crime. In fact, I had been taken to court throughout this period, as you are aware, and at no point was I ever charged with even the offense of treason felony. I was only subsequently charged a few days ago. And so I was held without charge, without even being informed that I was being investigated for treason felony, by persons who believe and claim to love our democracy more than us, young people mobilizing for democratic reforms.
Oliver, so has this entire process is through from your arrival to what happened to you and now where we are. Now, you still getting on with the fight you claim to get this country on the right track.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about what is wrong with us as a country.
Yeah.
What really is the problem? What do we need to change?
Yeah.
How can we change it? And who has to take the lead in changing this?
So, that's a loaded question.
Very.
I remember in my first public statement, I talked about, a lot of times I hear Ghanaians talk about how Ghanaians are not angry enough, or we are the problem because we continue to elect the kind of leaders we elect. And I said none of that is true. All of that is only demeaning and intended to demoralize people and make them feel like, nothing I could do anyway. I'm part of the problem and all kinds of things. And I say that Ghanaians are angry. They haven't lost their sense of belief or their will to fight.
They're very angry?
Yes, I think Ghanaians are very
With what
angry.
we're seeing,
across the
education is down.
I think there's a huge resentment in the plains and countryside of this country. And that resentment I have seen up front and personal having mobilized in the different communities. You know, I think the Ghanaians have just lost the will to fight in a way.
They have lost?
That they have become so demoralized despite their anger that they are looking at this and then they are looking at the country happening to them. Let's take an example of the kind of strong opposition to the e-levy, for instance. Who has gone to the streets after this has been passed? Despite it being clear that nearly 90% of Ghanaians were fundamentally opposed to it. That in fact, the number of people who sent us messages wanting to join Fix the Country reached its highest level when I was arrested for claims that I wanted to overthrow the government. That so many more people were saying that we want to join Face the Country now. What does that tell you? That even the government is preaching this deliberate language of trying to strike fear, people were finding ways then, if it is true that Face the Country wants to do a coup d'etat, then I want to be part of it. You know? And we are reinforcing the message that no, this is about changing the democracy through the democratic means. Now, there are persons then who have then decided that we are going to block any attempt at a real conversation about how we do that. We have talked about, you know, the government, you know, the current, and I'm not saying that the problems we've created, we have never said that the problems we've created is the sole doing of this government.
Right.
We've talked consistently about systemic failures
right.
since
government,
let's put it past 30 years. But now we have custodians now who are in place, and they are the only persons who can speak with the authority of the state.
So you're not against this government, but
no,
the system itself.
I have never been against this government. But I do have reached a point where I think that the current president needs to be impeached. And I'm not against him. I am much more for the Constitution.
Why?
Because he used national security folks to attack the citizens of this country. That's the highest level of attack at our constitutional values. And I don't think that we should take any of this for granted. In fact, when the funeral was held, which bridged the COVID-19 restrictions that the president and highest persons in this government were involved in, I made a formal police complaint to the police and listed them and said, unfortunately, our constitution says the president cannot be tried while he's in office, but you can investigate the president in waiting for him to be impeached. You can investigate the crime. There's no constitutional protection like that for the vice president, or for the chief justice, or for Asiedu Nketia, who was also there, or for all these individuals we have videographic proof of. So do that investigation. I was called by media persons who were saying that, are you serious? Are you really thinking that the persons like this need to be held to account? I said, is this a democracy where we continue saying that no one is above the law? So at every point where we have actually taken up our democracy on its promises, we realize that the vanity of those promises break apart. Because nobody wants to hold anybody to account. Nobody wants to do the real work. And so if you have created an institutional framework that in fact frustrates the Constitution, we are living under a state of coup d'etat. It's a dictatorial process covered in the sham of with the trappings of a democracy. And that's not a society I want to live in. It's a society I want to help reform. And I think the more we organize, the more we bring more people together, the more people are losing the shyness and afraid of the status quo. And afraid of the guns they use in Nigeria, for instance. And saying that you can kill us, but you can't kill all of us. And it is a mentality that has animated Ghanaian democracy so far. In our resistance to the colonial oppressors, we said, meaning that no matter what you do, we continue to do that. Our independence was won in the resistance of an intellectual project through letter writing and speaking to people like we have done, and protest. What the British called the 1948 riots. No, that was the boycott of European goods and protesting. That's how we've changed. We're able to fight oppression. And that's the same tools we are using by leading the intellectual conversation and by going on protest. That's what we have seen our forefathers do.
When I come back, I want us to talk about your rallying of the Ghanaian youth and you thinking that they should take up their own destiny and lead this country into another level. Stay with us. 101 is back in a couple of seconds. For staying there, I am Bright Nana. For my guest, Oliver Barker-Vormawor is still with me in the studio, and we left off talking about how to fix this country. And he says that a lot has to be done. But let's go back. Oliver, welcome once again. Now, The issues are many. You find, like in a Jura, a young man deciding to start a campaign to let officialdom know what is wrong. Is there a way we can do this campaign perhaps without the style that seems to get our authorities uncomfortable?
I think that if we do not get our authorities uncomfortable, nothing will get fixed. You know, we've done this model of when there are problems, civil society will take donor money and organize a workshop and make the authorities keynote speakers, and they will come and moralize to us about the problems. There was a point in the time in this country where a minister of state was in parliament saying that, so we call on this government to, I said, well, you are the government. You know, we get a lot of that. But I was saying that we are not going to be, violence is always, it's going to be a non-violent process. But we have to make persons in leadership who have become comfortable in our oppression uncomfortable. And the way we do that is also thinking about what democratic tools achieve these means. One, by seeking direct accountability, by how we have done for SAL with the Electoral Commission.
Right.
By taking those processes, using democratic tools, we are saying that, okay, if this is what you did, we're not going to sit down and just hold workshops and say, it is sad, or it is sad, or we're actually going to take critical steps. By seizing the right to mobilize and saying, let us march in the streets. We haven't done anything. First, the country has held how many demonstrations in this country? There's never been a person killed. There's never been any property destroyed. All we have said is that we're in the street and we are singing.
African
we're singing liberation
are very
songs.
uncomfortable with such.
But it is in our constitution, you see. Our constitution guarantees the right to protest. There are persons who are in this government who led some of the biggest protests that have happened in this country. And we look back to those fondly as evidence of the Ghanaian resilience. So when did they become not part of Ghanaian culture and Ghanaian protest culture? Ghanaian has had a strong protest culture. And we understand that those tools work. So to say that the state is uncomfortable with our means of resistance, our oppression, then it means that that's what we need to be doing more of, not less of. Now, but one of the things we have also done is that we have continued to have a critical conversation with the state. They asked us, what do you want fixed? We said, okay, let Ghanaians speak. We let 12 million Ghanaians hashtag their problems. May 9th, which was yesterday, was a couple of days, was May 9th, was a year ago May 9th, we held our first virtual protest. And we said people should, you know, hashtag what their problems, they take pictures, communities and all those things. All that data exists. We cataloged that and analyzed that, and we said, okay, the best way to do this forward is to rethink the constitutional framework, is to look back at the national development plan, which is binding on Ghanaians, on political actors, that disciplines them better. This is what Ghanaians were asking for. None of those ideas have been taken up and engaged with. We talked about homelessness in this country. We produced a documentary on the situation of homelessness, which we streamed. And we talked about Occupy Sagleme, hoping that the government would do something about that. Nothing has been done a year on. So these are questions that we continue to come up in our body politic, and so many people continue to talk about. When a media house tried to highlight the problems and how do we improve free SHS, the president said they were running a campaign against him and his government. But this were giving a platform for Ghanaians to speak. So at every point where you're engaging the state and drawing the attention to the problems that exist, like Kaka was doing, he hadn't even gone on a demonstration. He was just sitting on social media and saying, okay, I've gone to this school, look at it, it's in a dilapidated state. Do something about it. He was killed for that. So I don't know how to be able to draw attention to our oppression without persons in government who are used to running away with the public kitty and not being held to account.
Are you doing this for your position NDC?
I have no interest in mobilizing for the NDC.
Some people in government think that you're working for the opposition.
Listen, NDC. I was part of those who were talking about Occupy Ghana. I was one of those who celebrated and pushed on for Doomsday Vigil. In all those times, I was accused of being MPP. At every point in time, there's going to be a government in place. And our role as citizens is to hold that government account. And the persons who are louder in labeling us understand the effect it has. Because for so many Ghanaians, they've treated both the NPP and NDC as parties lacking credibility. And so that if you then attach any of those labels to any person who's calling for critical reform, you are diminishing their credibility. Because those institutions, those parties have no credibility.
Some even say that you've ever worked at the office of the former president.
And I've issued a press statement, actually, in fact, when I was in jail,
you did not?
About it, that I have always been a civil servant. And I've challenged the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to deny this. That I was I was a diplomat with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I work in civil public office. Now, the presidency of Ghana always has civil servants.
Right.
And I received a letter that because we needed diplomats as liaison officers in the Flagstaff House, I received a letter signed while I was a civil servant by the current secretary to the president's cabinet, Ambassador Mercy Kakari, assigning me as a civil service officer to report to the head of the civil service at the presidency. I wasn't working for.
That's what you did?
Yes. And I was working, and the reason why I've not talked about it is because I understand the ethical values as a civil servant.
Right.
That is one of neutrality, is one of,
secrecy, and
secrecy,
you're not supposed to divulge all this information.
For the diplomatic service. And I worked for the civil service of Ghana and continued to draw salary as a civil servant between 800 cedis and 1,000 cedis throughout the period, till I resigned and went to Harvard. And at no point have I talked about this because, again, for whatever reasons, but I've never been a political appointee. The Mahama administration have sent, under the Presidential Office Act, the list of presidential appointees to Parliament all the time. I actually went to Parliament to got that information to give to media people and said, you can cross-check this. And this attempt at we must run everybody down, irrespective of what work you're doing, irrespective of what you're trying to give to this country, just because we must have our way and we must win at all costs. That's not a politics that I'm interested in. I'm interested in, let's ask critical questions of our democracy, and let's, like I say, fix poverty.
We're getting ready to wrap up. How strong is Oliver from what you've gone through so far?
I don't think I'm any stronger than the average individual. In fact, I've talked about, sometimes I regret that I'm a lawyer. And I regret it because I don't want any person looking back to think that I'm only able to do these things because I'm a lawyer, and that they need to be a lawyer first. I want it to be that everybody has a real stake in the conversation we are having. And this is one of the reasons why Fix the Country we've continued to prioritize mobilizing in low-income communities, persons, homeless communities, when we're moving settlement. These are persons, ordinary people, and I've talked about how when I was arrested, the people who were at the courts were not doctors and lawyers. These were ordinary people who were protesting because our message is directly translating to them and for them. And I draw strength from that as much as they draw from me because they're able to stand up for me in ways that I'm able to stand up for them. That's what I've always hoped for and hope to achieve.
We saw Occupy Ghana,
Yeah.
and when they took to the street under the previous administration, and we saw the people who were leading the chant, who are today in government. Is Oliver and his Fix the Country movement waiting for the next NDC government to take up public offices?
I gave an interview to a radio station in Obuasi when we were mobilizing there. And I said, if the NDC should come to office, and I should accept any political appointment from them, but the ancestors of this land curse me.
You won't accept an appointment from them?
No, I will not accept an appointment. Not because I don't think I'm qualified to hold any appointment and I can bring strong institutional reforms. But particularly because I think that there's so many people in the past who have laundered people's pain and suffering and use it to launch themselves into offices and to reinforce the status quo. And I don't think that's a good example I want us to set. I want people to be able to build imagination between these parties. And the way we do that is to say that I'm not looking, there's nothing you can give me in that, unless I'm going to be partakers of the corruption, what am I going to get from there? I'm fine. I resigned from the UN and went to pursue my own projects, So I have no interest in seeking office or accepting any appointment. I really enjoy and I find a real purpose in mobilizing and helping Ghanaians take our destiny into our own hands.
Fix the country without leave government. That's what you're saying.
That's what I'm working towards. And I hope that a lot more people are able to join the process for that to be a real, to come to reality. Because Fix the Country is not some individuals out of the community. It is us that gives it force. When we drew 15,000 people onto the streets, despite, all the attacks, these were ordinary Ghanaians. And the more ordinary Ghanaians continue to propel that energy, the more it will outlive whatever government comes.
This morning, you tried to take a look at the UN brackets for the youth in terms of age, and you compared that to that of Ghana and said that even those who are presumed to be the youth in our two major political parties do not fit in that age bracket. Yeah. Where are you heading to?
I'm a 34-year-old man turning 35
right
this year. And I understand that my youth badge will be withdrawn
Very soon.
very soon. But I am very, I have talked a lot about a society where the average age is 16, 17. And when you can take 10, I can give you the names of 10 presidential appointees, including the president. And if you add their combined age, it will be more than 800. It's unconscionable. And I think that when I look at countries like Finland and others where, the cabinet is made up of 34, 33-year-olds, Jerry Rawlings was head of state at 31. I don't see where we are going. I think that the youth has a real place in our democracy. And so I just look at the main political parties and the National Youth Organizer of the NPP and NDC being 41 and 42, respectively, way above our own extended definition of what a youth is. And I ask myself, there's no real commitment to have a conversation with young people and to ensure that our democracy serves tomorrow's generation. When we are calling for a new constitution for a new generation, we really mean it in every sense of the word. That persons at their most creative age, at their most vibrant age, should be the ones in charge of policy in this country. Because then they are not tired. They are not dozing off in meetings. They are giving their vibrancy then. I don't think that I can be doing this at 60 or 65. Impossible. So I understand that when the president and other people go off and sleep in meetings, I think that I'll be sleeping at that age too. This is the time we reform our democracy by drawing on young people and young energies. They're the most creative in terms of creating startup companies, thinking of technology and the way we can improve our democracy. And we have to turn over the mantle to them to move our society. And as of a certain age then, can focus on careers in the private sector. We cannot occupy this government space and tell young people, go and create businesses, when we haven't shown them an example of us doing so. That's what I'm interested in.
Finally, the ideal Ghana you've been looking for.
Yeah.
Paint a picture for me. Let's wrap up on this one.
I've looked at societies like Norway, Sweden, Finland. They are not as resource rich as we are, but they have created a system that is based on empathy and humanity. I've gone to and lived in Norway, and I've seen people who are cleaners have access to being able to buy their own house and drive their own cars, where they're able to raise their grandchildren and go on vacations. I don't see that is not something that we can create. The ability to let our young people feel free, that they don't have to become the pension plan of their parents, that they can think of careers and decide to take up photography. They can travel the world, take a gap year. That's where the true essence of living in a society, because the society takes care of you. That's the vision of a Ghana I want, where young people are allowed to be young. That's the society I want, and I don't see it. Even though we have all the means to it, I think that we are so consumed by individuals wanting to earn more and then have people line up in front of their houses that I paid your school fees and I paid your hospital bills. That is not a society. That's not a society I want to live in. And it's not one I want for when I do have children for them to live in.
Oliver, grateful for talking to us.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
And thank you too for talking to us. My name is Bright Nanamfo. Thanks so much for joining us. Good night.